Imagine digging into the ground and finding thousands of ancient objects that were never meant to be found. Broken bronze faces, golden masks, massive statues, precious jade, and the strangest part? Many of them were deliberately buried. Some were burned, some were broken, and some were buried so carefully that it almost feels as if someone wanted to hide them forever. But why? Who buried them? And what were they trying to hide? More than 3,000 years ago, in what is now China, an extraordinary civilization disappeared from history. They left behind no clear explanation, no final message, only a mysterious collection of objects, buried beneath the earth. And when archaeologists finally uncovered them, they discovered something that would completely change what we thought we knew about the ancient world. This is the story of Sanxingdui, a civilization that vanished, and left behind a mystery that still has no complete answer. For thousands of years, nobody knew Sanxingdui had ever existed. There were no famous historical records describing its people. No surviving stories told us who they were. And no ancient text clearly explained what happened to them. The civilization was simply gone. But then, in the year 1929, something unexpected happened. A farmer in Sichuan, China, discovered a collection of ancient jade objects while working near an irrigation ditch. At first, it seemed like an ordinary archaeological discovery. But it wasn't. Decades later, archaeologists began excavating the area. And what they found was astonishing. They discovered enormous pits filled with thousands of ancient objects. Bronze heads, gold masks, jade ornaments, elephant tusks, and enormous bronze figures unlike anything previously discovered in ancient China. Some of the bronze faces had enormous eyes. Others had strange, exaggerated features. They did not look like ordinary human portraits. And suddenly, archaeologists realized something important. This was not just a collection of ancient treasures. It was evidence of a civilization that had developed a culture unlike anything they expected to find. But there was still one enormous question. Why were all of these extraordinary objects buried together? And why were so many of them deliberately broken or burned before they were buried? The deeper the archaeologists looked, the stranger the discovery became. The objects were not simply buried underground. They had been placed inside large pits. And the way they were arranged suggested that this was not an accident. Many of the objects had been deliberately damaged. Some bronze figures had been broken. Some artifacts had been burned. And some precious objects appeared to have been carefully placed among the remains. Why would anyone destroy objects that were valuable enough to survive for thousands of years? That question changed everything, because archaeologists began to consider a disturbing possibility. Perhaps these objects were not simply thrown away. Perhaps they were part of a ritual, a ceremony, a final act performed by the people of Sanxingdui. Imagine standing there more than 3,000 years ago. You are surrounded by enormous bronze faces, golden masks, sacred objects, and fire. One by one, these extraordinary objects are placed into a pit. Some are broken, some are burned, and then, the pit is covered with earth. For thousands of years, nobody knows what happened, until archaeologists open it again. But if this was a ritual, there is an even bigger mystery. What were they saying goodbye to? Their gods? Their city? Their old way of life? Or something much more important? Because the most mysterious part of Sanxingdui is not what they buried. It is what happened after they buried it. Then archaeologists began studying the bronze faces more closely, and they noticed something extraordinary. These were not ordinary statues. The eyes were enormous. The ears were exaggerated. The mouths were strangely shaped. Some faces looked almost human. Others looked completely unfamiliar. But there was something else. Many of these faces were not looking at the ground. They appeared to be looking upward, toward the sky, and that raised another question. Who were these figures supposed to represent? Ancient rulers? Gods? Ancestors? Or beings from a world that the people of Sanxingdui believed existed beyond their own? We have no surviving text that gives us a clear answer. That is what makes the discovery so difficult to understand. The people of Sanxingdui left behind thousands of objects. But they did not leave behind a simple explanation for what those objects meant. We can study the bronze. We can study the gold. We can study the patterns. We can compare the objects with other ancient cultures. But we cannot simply ask the people who made them. They disappeared more than 3,000 years ago, and their voices disappeared with them. All we have left are the faces. Silent faces, staring back at us from the darkness of the earth. Among all the discoveries at Sanxingdui, one object stands out. A golden mask. It was placed inside one of the ancient pits, surrounded by other extraordinary objects. The mask is thin, delicate, and yet it survived for more than 3,000 years beneath the earth. Its face is unlike an ordinary human face. The eyes are unusually large. The ears are exaggerated, and the expression is almost impossible to read. But there is something about it that makes the mask unforgettable. It looks less like a portrait, and more like a symbol. A symbol of someone or something that was extremely important to the people who created it. Gold was rare, bronze required advanced knowledge and enormous effort. And objects like these were not made casually. Someone had to mine the materials. Someone had to shape them. Someone had to decide what they would represent. And then, someone deliberately placed them into a pit. Why would a civilization spend so much effort creating objects like this, only to destroy some of them, burn them, and bury them? Perhaps the answer lies in what happened to Sanxingdui itself. Because not long after these mysterious rituals, something changed. The great center of this civilization was abandoned. Its people did not leave behind a clear record explaining why. There was no single final inscription. No ancient document saying, "We are leaving." Instead, there was silence. And that silence is where the real mystery begins. So what happened to the people of Sanxingdui? For a long time, archaeologists had very few answers. The civilization had clearly been powerful. Its craftsmen created enormous bronze sculptures. Its artists produced remarkable gold objects. Its people had access to valuable materials from distant regions. And yet, the center of their civilization was eventually abandoned. One possibility is that a natural disaster changed everything. Some researchers have suggested earthquakes may have played a role. Others have considered the possibility of flooding. There is also evidence that the region experienced major environmental changes over long periods of time. But there is a problem. None of these explanations completely solves the mystery. A disaster might explain why a city was abandoned. But it does not completely explain why so many precious objects were deliberately broken, burned and buried. So another possibility appears. Perhaps this was not simply the end of a city. Perhaps it was the end of an era. The people may have moved. Their political center may have changed. Their religious beliefs may have transformed. And the objects that once represented their old world may have been buried as part of a final ritual. In that case, the pits were not garbage dumps. They may have been something much more meaningful. A final goodbye. But there is one problem with that theory. If these people simply moved on, why did their culture change so dramatically? And where did they go? That question has fascinated archaeologists for decades. Because somewhere beyond the ruins, the people of Sanxingdui may have continued to live. They may have carried their traditions with them. They may have joined another civilization. Or they may have disappeared into history completely. And the evidence may still be waiting underground. There is another clue, and it may be hidden in the landscape itself. Sanxingdui was built near rivers. Water was essential for survival. It provided food, transportation, agriculture, and a connection to distant regions. But rivers can also destroy civilizations. Over time, the landscape around Sanxingdui changed. Floods may have altered the river channels. The environment may have become increasingly difficult to control. And if a major flood struck the region, the people would have faced an enormous problem. Their fields could have been destroyed. Their homes could have been damaged. Their sacred places could have become unusable. But there is still something that does not fit. A natural disaster could explain abandonment. It could explain destruction, but it does not easily explain the strange pits. The objects inside them were not simply buried by mud. Many appeared to have been intentionally placed there, and some had been deliberately destroyed before burial. That suggests human decisions. Someone chose to break them. Someone chose to burn them. Someone chose to bury them. And that means the final moments of Sanxingdui may not have been completely chaotic. They may have been carefully planned. Perhaps the people knew they were leaving. Perhaps they believed their world was coming to an end. And perhaps the objects were not being hidden from other people at all. Perhaps they were being offered to something they believed was watching from above. The sky, the ancestors, the gods, or something we still do not understand. And if that is true, the pits may not be evidence of destruction. They may be evidence of belief. A final ritual, performed before an entire world changed forever. But there is one more mystery. Sanxingdui did not exist in complete isolation. Archaeologists have found evidence suggesting that its people had connections with other regions. Some of the materials used to create their extraordinary objects came from far away. This means the people of Sanxingdui were not simply living in a small, isolated settlement. They were part of a much larger world. They traded, they traveled, they exchanged ideas, and they developed their own unique culture. But then something changed. Their world began to disappear. And somewhere along the way, another civilization rose to prominence. The ancient city of Jinsha became an important center in the same region. And this creates a fascinating possibility. Perhaps the people of Sanxingdui did not simply vanish. Perhaps they moved. Perhaps they carried their traditions, their beliefs and their knowledge with them. If so, the mysterious bronze faces may not represent the end of a civilization. They may represent the transformation of one. But there is still no definitive answer. We do not know exactly why Sanxingdui was abandoned. We do not know exactly why the ritual pits were created. And we do not know exactly what the strange faces were supposed to represent. That is what makes this discovery so fascinating. Because every answer creates another question. The more we discover, the less simple the story becomes. And perhaps that is the real lesson of Sanxingdui. History is not always a straight line. Sometimes civilizations do not disappear. Sometimes they change, move, merge, and leave only fragments of their former world behind. Fragments buried beneath the earth, waiting thousands of years for someone to find them. But now we come to the question that refuses to disappear. What were those strange bronze faces? For decades, people have looked at them and tried to give them an identity. Some believe they represented gods. Others believe they represented ancestors. Some researchers think they may have been symbolic figures connected to ancient religious beliefs. And there is another possibility. Perhaps they were not meant to represent real people at all. Perhaps their exaggerated eyes, enormous ears and unusual expressions were created to show something humans could not normally see. A different world, a spiritual realm, or a connection between humans and the heavens. We have to be careful here. There is no reliable evidence that these statues represented extraterrestrials. That idea is popular on the internet, but archaeology does not support it. The real mystery is much more interesting. These people created objects unlike anything else known from their time. They developed sophisticated bronze casting techniques. They worked with gold. They carved jade. They created enormous ritual objects. And they built a culture that was clearly capable of complex organization. Yet we still do not fully understand their beliefs. We can see what they created, but we cannot hear the stories they told. We can study their objects, but we cannot ask them what those objects meant. And perhaps that is why the bronze faces feel so strange. They seem to be looking directly at us, across more than 3,000 years of history. Their eyes are open, their expressions are frozen, and they cannot tell us what they saw. Maybe they were gods. Maybe they were ancestors. Maybe they were symbols. Or maybe they represented something we have not yet learned how to recognize. The answer may still be buried somewhere in the ruins of Sanxingdui. And until archaeology uncovers more evidence, the faces will continue to watch in silence. After more than 3,000 years, we still do not know the full story of Sanxingdui. We do not know exactly who built it. We do not know exactly why they created those enormous bronze faces. We do not know why so many precious objects were deliberately destroyed. And we still do not know exactly why the civilization changed so dramatically. But perhaps there is something we have been asking the wrong way. Maybe the question is not, Why did Sanxingdui disappear? Maybe the better question is, what did Sanxingdui become? Because civilizations rarely vanish without leaving something behind. People move, cultures merge, beliefs change, languages evolve, and traditions survive in places we may not expect. The people of Sanxingdui may have left their city, but they may not have disappeared completely. Their ideas may have traveled. Their beliefs may have influenced later cultures. Their craftsmanship may have survived through generations. And the objects they buried may have been their final connection to a world that was already changing. Thousands of years later, we are standing on the other side of that mystery. We can see their faces. We can touch the objects they created. We can study the earth that covered them. But there is one thing we still cannot recover. Their voices. They left us no final message explaining what happened. No simple answer. Only clues. Broken bronze. Burned objects. Golden masks. Silent faces. And thousands of years of unanswered questions. Maybe one day, another excavation will reveal the missing piece. Another inscription, another settlement, another buried chamber, and perhaps that discovery will finally tell us why the people of Sanxingdui buried their world beneath the earth. Until then, the ancient faces remain, watching, waiting, and reminding us that some of history's greatest mysteries are not lost because the evidence disappeared. They are lost because we still don't know how to read it. And perhaps that is what makes Sanxingdui so extraordinary. It is not simply the story of an ancient civilization. It is the story of how little we still know about the people who came before us. More than 3,000 years have passed. Kingdoms have risen and fallen. Cities have disappeared. Languages have been forgotten. But beneath the soil of Sichuan, the faces of Sanxingdui remained, waiting for someone to uncover them. And now, after decades of archaeological discoveries, we have more evidence than ever before. But we still do not have the complete story. Perhaps that story is hidden beneath another layer of earth. Perhaps it is waiting inside an undiscovered tomb. Or perhaps the final answer was never written down at all. Maybe the people of Sanxingdui believed that their final ritual needed no explanation. Maybe they knew that one day, someone would uncover what they left behind. And someone would ask the same question we are asking today. Why did they bury it? We may not know the answer yet. But that is the strange power of archaeology. Sometimes, the deeper we dig into the past, the more questions we uncover. This is Chronicle Files. And if you want to explore the mysteries history left behind, subscribe. Because somewhere beneath the earth, another forgotten story may still be waiting. But perhaps, the greatest mystery is not what the people of Sanxingdui buried. It is what they knew, that we still don't. 3,000 years ago, they left something behind. Not a book, not a message, but thousands of silent objects beneath the earth. And perhaps one day, one more discovery will finally give those silent faces a voice. Until then, the mystery remains buried.